All right, everybody, let's get started. Good evening and welcome to the Virtual Science Cafe, brought to you by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I am your host. Welcome. My name is Chris Smith, and I am curator for the Daily Planet Theater at the museum, which is tricky because right now, we don't actually have a museum that we're going to. So I am curator of the Virtual Science Cafe on YouTube. That's what it's going to be. Tonight, we've got a great show for you and a great guest, someone who's a little bit of a new face around the museum. In fact, what a time to start a new job. But Dr. Mike Cove. He's a new research curator for mammalogy at the museum. And tonight, we're going to be talking about, you guessed it, mammals. Mike, how are you doing?
Hey, great. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. How are things on your side of North Carolina?
I'm here in sunny Zebulon, and it's pretty lovely out.
Nice, nice. Yeah, we had a really nice day here.
Yeah. Perfect weather.
So, real quick, first question, and then we'll jump into the presentation. You study carnivores, tapirs, and rodents. Like, how do you bring like really big things with sharp teeth down to like little tiny things that not very many people are afraid of?
Yeah. Well, I think that I have the opportunity and the pleasure to study mammals, which are a really charismatic, diverse group of taxa globally. And everyone is excited about the megafauna, and I personally am as well. But I think it's important to remember that there's also this whole world of these charismatic microfauna, which are, just as exciting, just as important. And I'm hoping to get everyone thinking that they're actually a pretty exciting taxa.
Well, I know I'm excited to learn about microfauna, not a term that I was familiar with until this.
It's okay. Word and PowerPoint keeps trying to correct it to megafauna, so maybe I coined it.
Well, right now we'll give it to you.
All right.
How about that?
Yeah.
Well, everybody, buckle up, put your thinking caps on, get ready for the Virtual Science Cafe with Dr. Mike Cove.
Thank you. Okay, can you see my screen? We're good? All right, thanks so much, everyone. As Chris mentioned, I'm the new curator of mammalogy. And again, I just wanted to talk a little bit about these charismatic small mammals that I've come to learn and love. And I hope maybe this brief introduction will get you guys excited about small mammals as well. And so you can follow me on Twitter or live tweet if you're interested in any of this, and we'll take it from there. So I think when you hear the term rodents, this is probably the first image that comes to mind, right? We think about rats and house mice that have coexisted with humans for thousands of years because they moved into our civilizations and our homes to feast on this shared resource, which is our grain that we've stored. And so I think the first thing that comes to mind is kind of a negative connotation when you think about rodents. In fact, if you look, this is a CNN headline just from late last year, where we see that 2 people got the plague in China, which is the Black Death, which killed hundreds of thousands of people all across Europe in the late 1300s. And right now, I have to consider that this probably would not be a breaking headline given the current pandemic. But I would like to talk about some of the things related to disease ecology, especially rodents, because they do have a particularly bad rap in terms of passing pathogens and zoonotic diseases to humans. But remember that they're not all bad. And in fact, some of the most iconic media animals are rodents, right? So we have animals like Mickey Mouse, Mighty Mouse, Ratatouille, Master Splinter, right? The Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So we do have this positive connotation of rodents. And I want to try to remind you about why these species are really actually pretty cool just beyond their TV and movie personas and their ability to cook and fight crime. So let's take a backpedal here and look at the mammals more broadly. Actually, rodents are the most diverse group of all of the mammals. In fact, there's over 2,500 species of rodents. That's much more than some of the other more common groups that we consider, like the carnivores. There's only about 300, a little over 300 species of carnivores. The felids, the big cats and small cats, there's only a little over 30 of those felids and canids, even wolves and foxes. And so we see that the most diverse group here out of all the mammals that we think about is not, lions, tigers, and elephants. It's actually these small species. And we don't really give them as much credit as they deserve because it's hard to see them sometimes, and it's hard to see that really unique diversity. So here's just a really cool smattering of some of those species, right? We have this really neat desert evolved kangaroo rat on the top left. We have this cool tree dwelling semi-arboreal hoodia from the Dominican Republic in Cuba. On the top right, we have one of the classic species, the deer mouse. On the bottom right, we have the world's largest rodent, right? Basically a gigantic guinea pig from South America, the capybara. And in the middle, we have, that's not a rabbit. It might look like one. It looks to me almost like maybe a guinea pig on stilts, right? This is the Patagonian mara. This is another giant rodent from common in South America. And so let's just look at the data. This is a brand new paper that just came out this week, relevant to COVID and pandemics. And what we see here, we'll step back a little. What we see is the number of zoonotic species on the y-axis and the number of viral species on the x-axis. And if you look in the top right corner there, we see that rodents actually have the highest count of zoonotic diseases. And zoonotic diseases are those that can be passed from animals to humans. And so it's no wonder that the CDC has important guidelines for dealing with rodents and thinking about viruses and issues with, for example, hantavirus that causes a severe pulmonary distress. But if we look, when we scale that effect again back to look at the number of zoonotic species to the number of species within that clade, you see that the rodents again fall right on that line. So what that shows is that actually what's happening is the reason there are so many zoonotic diseases that are passed from rodents to humans is actually because the number of species of rodents is so high that it scales accordingly with that. But that also makes rodents important for disease ecology research. Mice and rats are the two #1 model organisms for vaccine research and all different types of services for humans and public health. But why should we care about rodents other than the fact that two of them are important model organisms for health, vaccines, and cancer research, for example? Well, again, remember, I study all types of mammals. So this is an important basal resource in the food web, right? Rodents are an important food resource for tons of other species, whether it's raptors and eagles, maybe not eagles, actually. Maybe they eat some of the larger rodents, but raptors and owls, up to this beautiful cat here. This is the ocelot from Central and South America. And you can see that, it was just beautiful luck that she passed in front of my camera trap here, but you can see that they have a spiny rat in their mouth. And so that's a common species in Central America, and that's an important basal resource at the bottom of that food web. So you think about how important they are for building that food web and food chain up to the top. But other species are really unique as well. Remember this one, the beaver, right? This historically had a distribution across the entire all of North America, right? And they were largely hunted and extirpated from lots of areas because for their pelts and because of things like damage to waterways and destruction. Clearing your lumber and stealing it and putting it into waterways might not be the best way to coexist with humans. But what's really neat here is this is an ecosystem engineer, right? And an ecosystem engineer, what they do, beavers, they don't just chop down, they chew and gnaw and gnaw and gnaw on these trees, eventually knock them down, and then they pull them into waterways and flood these important pastures and create habitat for all different types of fishes to reproduce and nurse, and nurseries, fish nurseries. They produce habitats for other species like muskrats, and really in North Carolina, there's actually one species that is actually more or less dependent on beavers, and that's the endangered St. Francis satyr butterfly, which is endemic to Fort Bragg. And so these butterflies are dependent on the beavers flooding waterways and creating these, I guess it's a sedge type habitat for this endangered butterfly to nest and lay their eggs. But what's neat is beavers are making a comeback. This is one of our camera trap photos. And if you look in the distance there, you can see some lights. Those are actually headlights from cars. And this photo is from within our nation's capital. This is a photo of a beaver from the Anacostia National Park, located right in Washington, D.C. So it's incredible that after years of being lost from ecosystems, they're starting to return that important service where they're building these dams and flooding waterways to create habitat for other important species. Here's another one that I like. It's not the best photo. They're a little speedy considering their robustness, but this is a pretty large rodent. This is the paca. This is a cool nocturnal striped rodent from Central America. They have just a neat ecology. They're bigger than some medium-sized dogs, and they're important fruit predators and leaf predators. And so they cruise around in the forest and are important prey for other exciting species like jaguars and pumas. Another cool species from Central America, which is kind of the diurnal, the day active analog to the paca, is this. This is the Central American agouti. And agoutis are neat because they look kind of like a big guinea pig, a little bit stilt-like. But if you look at the baby agouti back there, you see that agouti is hunched back up on its hind legs, and it's chewing something, right? That's because agoutis are able to chew through the hardest of seeds. And so, like squirrels in North America, agoutis are these important scatter hoarding rodents that take these very hard seeds and scatter them and hide them, just like squirrels do in the United States and here in North Carolina. And so what's really neat is these guys play a huge role in dispersing seeds for things like the almond trees of Central America. And the almond trees are one of the only species of trees that the endangered great green macaw nests in. So this little rodent, about this big, is vital for spreading the seeds of these almond trees that are important for saving macaws. And so it's really, really interesting to see that it's not just, rodents make up the bottom of the food web for the cool species we like, they're actually providing these really important ecosystem services that, keep life going in the forest. So now I took you on a little smattering of, DC, Central America. Now I'm going to take you to the land of margaritas and Jimmy Buffett music. We're going to the Florida Keys. So I think it's kind of something that people don't realize is there's actually quite a bit of endangered endemic wildlife in the Florida Keys. So this is actually those other rodents are very cool and large and provide these really neat ecosystem services. But this right here is actually my favorite. This is the Key Largo Woodrat. This is a small juvenile woodrat. It's really just a unique, neat species, and they're only found in Key Largo, Florida, that first island off the coast of the first key of the Florida Keys off the coast of the Everglades and Miami. And so I've been studying them for almost a decade now, since 2012. So these guys have really captured my heart. And so you can see here on the right, this is their remaining habitat. So that's North Key Largo. Now, most people that are familiar with the Keys, you drive in, you head south, you go to Key West, and you never even notice that if you make a left, when you get onto Key Largo from Route 1, there's a whole wildlife refuge to the north there. That's the last remaining habitat for this cool little rodent, the woodrats. So here's a neat picture, camera trap photo again, of a mother woodrat and her two pups. And what's interesting here about the woodrat, the name woodrat is kind of a misnomer, right? It kind of has a bad connotation as a rat, right? We think about rats, we think about the Norway rats, the brown rats, sewer rats, all the same species, different names, house rat. And so it gives us a negative connotation. But really, the woodrat is actually a giant mouse. And so calling it a rat is a misnomer. It's the woodrat is in the family Chrysetidae, which is the New World mice and rats, and versus the house rat or the invasive black rat, brown rats are of the family Muridae, which are the old world mice and rats. And so calling this woodrat a rat instead of a giant mouse is akin to calling a wolf a tiger, which is really interesting because if we called it a giant wood mouse, I bet we'd get people more excited about them, because when have you ever seen a mouse that's this big? And so again, you could see the difference is very significant here, right? The woodrat on the left is quite cute. It really looks like a giant mouse, right? Whereas the black rat, the roof rat to the right has those long guard hairs, kind of ratty ears, kind of pointy, vicious looking face. And then the other really distinctive characteristic is the tail. The woodrat's tail actually has hair all along it, which of course makes them more charismatic than the long Slytherin naked tails of the black rats. But remember, we'll go back to that wolf and tiger analogy. Woodrats really are like wolves. Remember, wolves are keystone species. And so here's an example of an area where in Yellowstone, where after they restored wolves to Yellowstone, they found that there were all these ecosystem processes and the habitat was restored and it encouraged other species to come back. Well, woodrats are actually a keystone species, well, an ecosystem engineer similar to the beavers and a keystone species in Key Largo. And so here's a mother and her pup again. And so you can see that as ecosystem engineers, what they do, another name for woodrats is the pack rat. And so what they do is they collect all of these sticks and they pile them and they pile them, and they're almost neurotic. And so here is one of the first photos of a Key Largo woodrat nest from the 1920s from Key Largo. And it's almost the size of a car. But the story of the Key Largo Woodrat starts on kind of a sad end, where most of Key Largo, you don't realize, was actually cleared for agriculture. And Key Largo was, in fact, the #1 producer of pineapples for the whole United States in the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. And so this is what the habitat looked like instead of the lush forest on the other side. And so when you look at the cross section of that habitat, you can see that it's scraped down and bare. And there's not a lot of cover and holes in this fossilized coral reef for the woodrats to build their nests. And so in the late 1990s, early 2000s, they found that woodrats were adapting. They were using things like old cars and garbage heaps to build their nest. And so you can see this car in the woods is actually full of sticks. It's a woodrat nest. And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and in particular, a couple of really excited volunteers, helped restore the woodrats from near extinction, where they actually started building these supplemental nest structures. And so it's really just a plastic culvert like this, cover it with a little bit of rock, and if you build it, the woodrats will come. And so we can monitor these over time with things like camera traps and look at their populations using these supplemental nests. And so here's an example of a supplemental nest when it's built, creating that nesting structure, that habitat that was lost from the historical degradation and agricultural expansion in Key Largo. And here's that same exact nest only 3 months later. You can see these guys are really piling a lot of nutrients into that area. It's really, really cool. And so here's a picture of me crouched down by a nest, and you can see this is a 300-gram rodent. It's big. It's a large, giant mouse, right? But these are huge sticks that these guys are dragging all over the forest. And what they're doing is they're piling nutrients into these giant, rich, basically giant compost heaps that they live in. And it's creating habitat for other species and important, seed caches for the trees to restore in that endangered Florida forest. And so what's cool is we can actually track these individuals. So here's a photo of one to the left, where this is actually the first woodrat I ever tagged. And so we capture them, we give them a little earring. You can see 001, Neotoma, which is the genus of the species, 1. And you can see we take a tiny ear punch from their ear for genetic analyses. And what we can do with that is show that the restoration of the habitat, along with things like removing some of the invasive predators like feral cats and Burmese pythons, has actually helped restore this population. And again, they're building these giant stick nests. And so here's another way we can monitor them is the woodrats love to decorate their nests. So what we did was we actually painted all of these sticks in different triplet color combinations, spread them out all over the forest in arrays so we knew exactly where they were. And we could actually take a stick and by the color combination, quantify how far the woodrats carried that stick. And so they're carrying these sticks over 50 meters sometimes. So this is really, really cool, compiling all these nutrients. And so there are these really cool ecosystem level effects where you have all of these migratory birds that stop at the nests and might be attracted to some of the bugs that are using the nests. You have other endangered rodents, other species like squirrels that are raiding the caches, raccoons that are raiding the caches. And then you have some endangered species like the Stock Island tree snail that also uses these nests, and other unique little lizards and some endangered small, really small snakes from southern Florida. And so it's really a unique system. And I'm just so lucky that I have this really cool, exciting job where I get to go walk around in the woods. I'm looking for these giant stick nests, looking for evidence of these woodrats. And so here I am walking in Key Largo, but my job's only getting started because this is the distribution of that woodrat of the eastern woodrat, right? So remember, the key Largo woodrat is this endemic subspecies of the eastern woodrat. And this is the distribution. And now if we zoom in, we can see that this species actually occurs right in our backyard here in North Carolina. But you can see that it's actually quite rare. It lives down off the coast, southeastern North Carolina, and over in the Smokies. And so now is the time where I'm excited to start doing surveys and looking in some of these other areas where we don't just have confirmed presence, but maybe where we have possible or predicted presence, and trying to see if with habitat restoration, we can restore these rodents to their natural range and restore that important ecosystem function where they're piling all these nutrients into these giant compost heaps and important seed caches. And so here's just another example just to showcase just how big these nests are. And they're multi-generational. They last for years because mothers and their pups grow up and start using those nests. And so there's a photo of myself near a nest. And then there's a photo of one of the volunteers, Ralph and Clay DeGainer, that have really done a number of work, an incredible amount of work to really help produce these supplemental nests and restore their habitat, even though they're octogenarians. So with that, I would love to take any questions and talk about the wood rats, the other rodents, all different types of stuff. So please feel free to shoot me some questions. And also, again, please feel free to tweet at me or shoot me an email anytime to talk about these cool rodents, but also the mammals more broadly. So thank you very much.
All right, cue applause track. Yay!
Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Wow, that was really fun. These are some, well, first off, I want to say these pictures are incredible.
Thank you. Thank you.
Like, you've got some of the cutest animals. And I mean, how do you get all of these photos? Are these all camera trap photos?
A lot of these are camera trap photos. You can tell, especially when you see the infrared, the black and white photos.
Right.
In this sequence here, you could see this pair of male wood rats battling to the bottom left here, and you could see that what happens is on the nest, the males will battle over mates and territory, right? And so what we have is this camera trap that uses a motion sensor to trigger and take a photo when an animal passes by. And so we were able to capture that little battle royale there. And then the other photo in the top right, you can see the whole camera trap image, where you can see that actually what's cool about the camera traps is that they record the date and the time. So we could learn a lot about these animals. And for example, that's one of the first photos ever of a wood rat active during the day. These are almost exclusively nocturnal species. The one in the middle there, that's the most iconic photo there is. Clay DeGainer took that photo probably over a decade ago now. And the reason he was able to get that photo was because when we do our population monitoring and we're able to catch and handle these rodents, you do have the opportunity to get kind of the perfect classic photo when you release them back into the wild.
I like it. I like it. So I want to let everybody know watching at home or watching on your device, there in the chat, if you've got questions for Mike about rodents or probably carnivores, mammals, research too, stuff happening here in North Carolina and his work around the world, post those there in the chat. We're monitoring that and we'll pose those to Mike. But something you just said, Mike, got me curious. You're talking about monitoring this population of the key Largo Woodrat, trying to understand more about their ecology, how they're using the space, what makes them ecosystem engineers, what makes them keystone, like what makes them such important members. How many rats do you have to catch in order to draw some good conclusions for an endangered population?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when I first started studying the wood rats, they were actually at a pretty low point where there were only, we don't, we will never know how many wood rats there are, right? This is an elusive species. Even though we can count how many of these cool, giant stick nests there's can be multiple individuals within a nest. You can have individuals own and manage multiple nests. And so it's not necessarily that hard to trap them, but that's where what comes in with the what we call capture recapture. And so that's why we're tagging them and giving them a unique little ID. And so what we can do is we can go out, we can sample them. And I think over the course of my time, I've captured a couple hundred wood rats, right? So there's at least a couple hundred of them, right? So that's encouraging. And so what you do is you tag them and then you go out and you resurvey. And so eventually what you're going to do is you're going to recapture some of those individuals and you're going to be capturing new individuals, and you can estimate how detectable they are based on that proportion of the new versus the tagged individuals. And so that's how we estimate how many there are. Right now, we're still crunching those numbers, so I'm not at liberty to say how many there are, but I can tell you that with the implementation of supplemental nests and again exotic predator removal, things like feral cats and unfortunately Burmese pythons, we have seen the distribution of wood rats expand quite dramatically. And one thing that we was lacking in the late 1990s and early 2000s was the stick nests themselves were rare, and the wood rats were just living in again garbage heaps and piling some sticks on. But the habitat to start those stick nests was not really substantial because of the lingering historic effects of agriculture and pineapples, in fact.
Oh, okay. So the what wood rats remained were trying to make the best of the situation,
Mm-hmm.
but they really just needed more habitat, better protections.
Mm-hmm.
Cool stuff. Okay, I'm going to turn to the YouTube chat and see
All
what we
right.
got going on here. So it looks like the first question that popped up, Daniel was asking, "What is a basal resource?"
Oh, uh-oh, I'm throwing too much jargon out there, I guess, huh? So remember that everything's interconnected, right? There's a giant food web across the world, and at the bottom of the food chain is, the sun producing light for plants and vegetation. So that is the base of that food web, or think of it as a pyramid, right? So the base of the food pyramid is grass, trees, plants, seeds, etc. And so the next lowest basal layer up are some of these primary herbivores, like small rodents and things like that. And so when we think about, our small scale ecosystem here in North Carolina, you have the plants, you have the small rodents, and then the next layer up, you might have bobcats and coyotes and foxes, and then if depending on where you go, maybe out way east, then you even get another level up with the red wolves. And so that's just a term for thinking about the pyramid of the food web and how that all is connected. And so as you go up in levels.
So when you call rodents a basal resource, you're saying they're the thing that gets eaten by everything else.
They're the cheeseburgers of the forest. Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Okay, let's see. Linda asks, "What is the largest rodent alive?"
Well, that's an easy one. I think I might have shown a photo of one. That is the capybara, right? So that is a giant, some of them come in at almost 100 pounds. This is a huge rodent. They live in relatively large flocks, large family groups. What's cool is they're semi-aquatic. They're maybe not quite as aquatic as beavers, but they're pretty close. They're pretty close. But you can see them in South America in these. I don't know if they're herds or flock. They must be herds of capybaras, And you could see dozens of them, if maybe not hundreds, but dozens of them in these large groups and they just wade around in the water and eat things like floating hyacinth plants and things like that.
Michael Smith is asking, well, we have a story followed by a question. In
Ooh.
Arizona, they had pack rats and they damaged cars sitting outside. They would eat through parts of the engine. Are these giant mice related to, uh, I guess, Western pack rats?
Yes, so that's a great question. Yes, there's actually 30 or so wood rat species in North and Central America. And so the one that I focused on talking about was the key Largo woodrat, which is an endangered subspecies of the eastern woodrat that occurs here in the eastern United States. We have another woodrat that's a little further north that's also endangered species, the Allegheny woodrat, which is another woodrat of the eastern U.S. But then out west, you have all this really cool diversity of wood rats. That's where the majority of the species are. So you have these bushy-tailed wood rats, dusky-footed wood rats, and actually there's a couple of species of wood rats that used to live on the islands off the coast of Baja California that are extinct because they were island endemic species and lost a lot of their habitat. So yes, they are in fact the same species, but sorry, not species, same genus. Neotoma is the genus of the wood rats, pack rats. And out west, you have a lot more diversity where they're eating a lot more different things. Some of them are a bit more specialized than the eastern wood rats, for example. And yes, every once in a while, they can get into cars and things like that, as you saw with the Key Largo Woodrats in these abandoned cars in the forest there.
Yeah, that picture is amazing. Totally overtaken. All right. Christopher Arturo asks, how will climate change affect the future of these animals? Now,
Ooh.
this is interesting because climate change is impacting the Keys
Mm-hmm.
in really dramatic ways. In addition, I would imagine, to the species that live there compared to other parts of the East Coast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a great question. I'll focus on the key Largo wood rats in particular. So one thing that I didn't get to talk all that much about is the actual habitat that they use. Remember, the Keys are this giant fossilized coral reef that rose above the ocean, right? But as sea level rises, we are starting to see encroachment of different types of habitats, like mangrove ecosystems. And so, what's happening in the Keys is the wood rats live at the pinnacle of the highest elevation you can get in the Keys. Not very high, really, but they live in that high altitude, right? Altitude, I guess, forest in the Florida Keys, which is called the tropical hardwood hammock. And so that's why they're so important to that one particular ecosystem, because they're one of the main seed dispersers for lots of those different unique trees. And so that tropical hardwood hammock is, and only found in the Keys and South Florida, but it's also the flora are common to all over the Caribbean. So it's actually a really unique system because it's a tropical flora. The plants are this tropical Caribbean group, but the mammals themselves are actually a temperate group from North America that came down. And so projections are that it's not, obviously climate change is going to affect species broadly and humans even more broadly in time. But the good news for the wood rats, at least, is that they occur at the highest elevation of habitat in the Keys. And so even with current sea level rise projections, there's still quite a bit of habitat until we get to more dire levels of sea level rise. And I think the truth is, once we get to those levels, we have a lot more things to worry about than necessarily wood rats alone.
Ooh, yeah. I guess that's that's why we're trying to work on these problems, right?
Yeah,
Let's not get there. All right, there's lots more questions. I'll keep them coming.
great.
PJ Rock asks, "What is the best way to see if there is a?" Oh wait, okay, I get this question. What is the best way to see if there is a local mammalogist that needs volunteers?
Oh, that's a great question.
You
Well,
visit naturalsciences.org
yeah,
and fill out the application.
yeah, and I happen to be a local mammalogist here. I haven't had the opportunity to set up my office yet, but hopefully, when things are back running and we're through this our current situation here, I will hopefully have some opportunities to have host interns and maybe visit with some school groups and things like that.
It's a good question. Good question. Megan asks, "What are the main differences between the males and the females?"
Of wood
Thinking
rats,
back to the
it's
wood rats.
size. Male wood rats can be, over, high 200s, 300 grams. I'm sorry, as a scientist, I use the metric system, and I never know what the actual conversion is. So, that's probably not all that helpful. But 300 grams, it's a sizable, cool rodent. But the females are more in the mid hundreds, maybe clock out at a little over 200. So they're much smaller. Um, if you look, actually, what's interesting is the rodents more broadly actually have quite large testes. The males have quite large testes. And so you can see in some of the photos, it's really easy to tell the difference between a male and a female because of those external genitalia on the males.
We're getting comments that
Both
they
just
are.
as cute. Both just as cute, though.
People are commenting that these must be ROUSs or rodents of unusual size.
Oh,
Joanna asks, "What is the genus and species of a bushy-tailed woodrat?"
oh my goodness. I believe it's Neotoma cinereus. Boy, I hope that's right.
Because
No,
everybody
that's
but you can Google it right now.
yeah.
And
That is one of the species that lives out west, so that's not totally in my specialty of wood rats, but I'm pretty sure that's it. I hope.
I'm sure if it's wrong, they'll tell us in just a minute. Okay, Glenn asks, when they used the colored sticks, the ones you painted, were they attracted to the colors, or do we know anything about their color vision?
Oh, I think they like to huff the paint.
Okay. Ooh,
So yeah,
party in Keys.
so yeah, right. So it's interesting, right? Now, a lot of nocturnal mammals don't really have good color vision per se. Well, most mammals don't have good color vision, obviously. And especially nocturnal mammals don't need color vision because you obviously can't see a lot of color at night. And so I think what's happening there is they can see some of the iridescence of the color. They can see some of the color because they're obviously collecting them because they like the colors. But I'm not sure how great their color vision is. But what is interesting is they are decorators. The bowerbirds of the tropics over in Southeast Asia and in Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, the bowerbirds. They build those fancy nests, and the blue bowerbirds, for example, collect all the blue things and pile all these blue things together. The wood rats really like to decorate like that too. But what's interesting is the bowerbirds, the males are doing the decorating to attract females. But the wood rats, it's actually the females that are usually building the big elaborate nests to raise their youngs, and they'll kick the males out pretty quick once they're tired of them. And so the males will build stick nests, but they're dinky little things because they move around a lot more and don't really make these elaborate multi-generational nests. And so, but the females, they'll collect things like not just sticks, bark, but also skulls. You know, it's pretty intimidating to see a raccoon skull at the top of your fortress, right? That's your token or totem animal, right?
Oh,
That
wow.
they're guarding their nests. Things like snail shells, but they will collect garbage and things like that. So you'll find anything from solo cups to dropped Sharpies that researchers accidentally drop out of their pockets. And even I have even had a wood rat chew the bungee cord off of a camera trap and drag the camera trap into the nest only to be lodged as it got in, and then hooked the bungee cord on the inside of the nest so that we couldn't get it back.
That's incredible. That's amazing. All right. I hope you got time for more because they're rolling in.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. Frank Henson asks, are they like nutria? Maybe we're thinking about the capybara when that question came up.
Could be.
Nutria?
Yeah, nutria. Nutria are also known as coypus. I like to call them that instead of nutria. It sounds a lot cooler, right? Coypus.
Coypus. Okay.
Yeah. That comes from their scientific name. Myocastor coypu is the scientific name of the nutria. Nutrias are actually kind of they look very much like a giant rat, right? These are several pounds, and they're actually an invasive species here in the United States, where they were introduced presumably for the fur trade. They were accidentally released because of I believe for fur, and also for they do eat them in some places. Rodents are actually a delicacy in many other places, right? So beavers, for example, might look similar to nutria, and muskrats are another one. Muskrats might look similar to nutria, but they're actually very distantly related. Nutria are from South America, and they're again, like the wolf and the tiger, they're in totally different families.
Scott Cove is asking, are otters...
that guy? I don't. He's probably giving me a loaded question here.
Well, here goes. Are otters rodents like beavers?
Uh-oh. Oh my goodness, I've failed my younger brother.
Oh boy. Uh-oh.
Otters are carnivores. They belong to the family Mustelidae, and while they actually do look quite similar when you see them swimming, they're quite unique and are they're not chewing down trees. They are eating fish and mollusks and other prey that they find in the rivers and streams. And then you have things like sea otters that are out along the Pacific coast, where they're important. They are keystone species again, eating sea urchins and restoring kelp forests and things like that. So it is a common question. I'm just teasing my little brother. I'm surprised he's watching. I'm happy that you're watching, Scott.
Welcome to the show, Scott. Thanks for being here. All right, Vincent's asking, how did you decide on studying the key Largo Woodrat?
That is a interesting question. If you'll notice, the first couple of rodents that I shared were all Central American, right? We had the spiny rat in the ocelot's mouth, the paca, the big striped rodent from Central America, the agouti, the important seed disperser, and those are all from Costa Rica. At the time, this is a decade ago now, I was living in Costa Rica studying some of these medium and larger mammals like tapirs and some of those big rodents and ocelots. And I was looking to get my PhD and advance my doctoral studies. And I was hoping to stay in Costa Rica, but I ended up finding a project that was already sponsored by the US Fish and Wildlife Service, and it was working in the Florida Keys. And I had been a zookeeper previously in South Florida, so I had been to the Keys, and I thought, hey, that might not be such a bad place to do a PhD. And so it really opened up my eyes to what a unique wild world it is down there in the Keys. Not just people, also the wildlife.
Nice.
And I've kind of been studying these really unique species there ever since. So kind of, if I can give some advice to the younger conservationists out there watching, it's
Sure.
really good and useful to just take all the opportunities you get. And maybe you're studying tapirs and you have to downsize to wood rats, but I'll tell you what, you'll find that all of these species are just as unique and exciting, no matter where they are or how they interact. And so just using all the opportunities you can find to really study animals and ecology and conservation.
Awesome. All right. A few more. We got a few more minutes here. SQ is asking what types of traps you use. How do you catch a wood rat?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So we use what's called a Sherman trap. It's named after Dr. Sherman that invented them, a prominent mammalogist that invented them back in the probably 1920s or 30s, maybe a little later. And it's a compact steel trap. It's about this big, and it's similar to some of the live traps you might use to remove rodents from your households. Those are, excuse me, probably plastic. These are steel. I guess they're steel, and they have a little treadle. And what I use is I mix a little bit of peanut butter. Actually, I use powdered peanut butter and oats. You sprinkle a little bit in the back, and the rodents walk in. They trip the treadle, and the door closes behind them. And what we actually have is a security measure, is a little latch that locks this door from opening again, so that other animals like raccoons don't go in after the wood rats to eat them, especially since they're an endangered species. We don't want to be endangering them further because we're trapping them. And then once we capture them, we're able to pull them out into a little safe handling bag, and then we can take some measurements, take a little genetic sample. We actually give them a little transponder between their shoulder blades, a little injection transponder, so that we could track them with that, and an ear tag with a unique ID. And so the whole process takes just a couple minutes, and then we release them, and they're off and right back into their nest, before you know it. And it's incredible. You release them, and they just run into a little hole or something in the forest floor that you never even noticed before.
Wow. Wow. All right. Andrew's asking why they build those stick nests, and then why did the nests disappear? But I'm also curious about something related. I mean, you said they're big mice, but they have huge nests,
Mhm. Yeah.
just enormous.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, you saw the picture of me next to some of those nests. They can be the size of a small car. Really, they're huge. But those nests, those big ones, they do build these things over time. Over time, they are kind of neurotic, and they tinker with them, and they move this stick here, and they move this stick here, and they really manicure them nicely. But
Mhm.
it's the multi generations, it's the multiple generations that use that nest that build it up really spectacular. And so, sorry, what was the question? Oh, why they disappeared. And
Yeah.
so, remember, I showed that some of the landscape, if you look at old aerial photos, back when they used to film them from hot air balloons because there wasn't satellites in the 1920s and 40s, if you flew over Key Largo, all of the habitat, there wasn't a lot of forest. It was all clear cut and scraped down. And so what you saw was you had these small patches of forest interspersed among a sea of pineapple, tomatoes, and key limes. Maybe there are some other crops, maybe some citrus, some other citrus. And so what we hypothesize is that these little forest patches that were preserved because they, just by chance probably, that they weren't cleared, were the historic refugia of the wood rats, that they were able to survive in these small fragmented populations. And then um, in the late 70s, early 80s, they actually started to develop that whole area, and we're going to clear cut it and turn it into 40,000 condo units. And what happened was that was when the plight of the wood rats and the ecosystem that they depend on, the tropical hardwood hammock, came to light, that this was a really important habitat for this species and some other species, and important for, saving the cultural heritage of the Florida Keys, because you really don't have any other areas where you see this historic preserved habitat. So it's really a unique system. And what we're seeing now is that, the tropical hardwood hammock is a fast growing forest. They can canopy close within 30 to 40 years. But what we're seeing is that now a lot of the, mahoganies and big pigeon plums and other cool trees are actually getting really large. And that now with hurricanes, these rodents are adapted to hurricanes, right? They've been living with hurricanes for all of their existence. They actually benefit from the hurricanes because the hurricanes come through and are knocking down some of these big trees. And what the big trees do is, they have this roots that rip up the ground and create more fissures and space for them to build their nests. And so now what we're finding is we don't necessarily need to build more of the plastic supplemental nests, because the natural habitat, the forest, is finally old enough where we're seeing the natural nesting structure in these root balls and these root masses and tree falls, that they're creating their own nests again. And so we're hoping that, and we see that with the management and habitat preservation, we've seen that they are restoring and resurrecting some of these old nest sites and creating these big broad nests again. And so there's actually now several hundred of these giant stick nests all over in Key Largo. Whereas when I first started, I think there were only maybe, several dozen.
Wow. That's amazing that they bounce back really quick.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot of effort on the part of, some
Right.
of the volunteers and the Fish and Wildlife Service and other, the Florida state parks and other managers that have really put a lot of work in to not just restore the wood rats, but also remember that important habitat and ecosystem.
Yeah, and actually, the next question that's in here is about that. Do the Key Largo wood rats have important relationships with any other animals such that they would be negatively affected if these wood rats disappeared? And besides being prey items, maybe.
Right. So right now there's actually very few native predators of the wood rats left in Key Largo. There historically were bobcats, but they haven't seen bobcats since the late 80s, early 90s. There haven't been any confirmed bobcats. But now what's interesting is we do see coyotes have crossed 18 miles of bridges and berms to colonize the Florida Keys. And so we actually see coyotes in the Keys. Recently, we saw a gray fox that had colonized the Keys, but we haven't seen him again since Hurricane Irma. So we suspect that he might have disappeared. But other native predators, there's a diverse assemblage of rat snakes and indigo snakes, some small raptors don't really get them because raptors are active during the day and wood rats are out at night. But you do have some small screech owls and things like that will take young wood rats. But again, remember, they're creating these giant compost heaps. And so now our new research with some collaborators from the University of Florida, we're looking at measuring the humidity and temperature inside of these nests, because we think that they're actually creating their own little microclimate that's perfect, not just for seeds to germinate, but for other species, like some of these crown rim rock snake, some other native small snakes from the Florida Keys. There's also another endangered rodent, the key largo cottonmouse, that similar to how muskrats sometimes use beaver dams, the cotton mice sometimes use the woodrat stick nests. And then again, like I said, they're piling these nutrients, and so they're creating new soil underneath, and creating this really unique new soil layer for plants to germinate from, and other species to come colonize and flourish in those nests.
This one's gonna totally and completely shift gears on you.
Uh-oh.
How do city rats, like the ones in Chicago or New York or London, get so big?
Rats, hopefully I'm correct in this statement here. I'm pretty sure rats don't have your typical bone growth, bone plates. And so you have a determinate growth, right? I'm the size that I am because I can't get any bigger. Well, I guess I could get bigger wide, but I can't get any bigger tall or long, right? Well, and I'm not going to get bigger wide, just for the record. But some of these rats don't necessarily have that determinate growth, these growth plates that stop them. So things like reptiles can keep growing, right? That's why anacondas and crocodiles can get so big, because over time they just keep growing. They slow down in their growth, but they don't stop growing. And so rats, when resources are super plentiful, can really just chow down and grow really, really fast before those plates. I might be using the wrong terminology, but before they set in and they're kind of to their full capacity or size. And so that is why you do see variation where there's lots of resource subsidies for things like sewer rats and that are eating trash and garbage and things like that.
I don't know if Eric, who asked that, was necessarily going for such a great explanation, but
hopefully that's the correct explanation. It is.
Let's see. Caitlin's asking, did you ever catch anything that wasn't a woodrat?
Oh, you can catch plenty of other species. So remember I said that there was the key largo cottonmouse is another endangered species endemic to Key Largo. So we catch them all the time. And we actually tag them as well because we want to monitor their populations as well to see how they're responding to different management regimes. But there are some other small rodents, hispid cotton rats that we catch. But there are a couple interesting ones that you catch. Every once in a while, remember it's a trap this big, every once in a while you catch a possum that is completely crammed in there, and you pick it up and it's like a brick, right? And so you can't even open the door because they're so wedged in there. And so what you have to actually do is pull the pin out to just completely collapse and open this trap to get the possums out. Squirrels, kind of the same. Squirrels, you can open the door and they jump out, guns blaze, and they jump out right at you. But another interesting one that the first time I ever caught it, I was like, what the heck? Hermit crabs. We catch tons of hermit crabs coming into our traps. The terrestrial hermit crabs you see at the pet store, big ones like this big, come into the traps for the oatmeal and the peanut butter.
Oh, wow. So you go out to check traps and you're always just dumping hermit crabs.
Yep, we catch quite a few hermit crabs.
To try to catch the mammals.
Yeah.
Let's see. Brian's asking, does your research have any implications for the study of Allegheny woodrats in Western North Carolina?
Ooh, that is a great question, because as the new research curator of mammalogy, I'm hoping to get out into Western North Carolina and try to start doing some research on some of the eastern woodrats out there, but also the Allegheny woodrats. And there actually seem to be some areas where there might be some sympatry. Sympatry is where two different species overlap, and there could be some potentially cool research there. But Allegheny woodrats are a little more restricted to kind of karst cave systems. They use a lot more rocky areas, whereas the eastern woodrats are a little more generalist to forested areas. But it will be cool to finally get out there and try to apply some of this research to the Allegheny and eastern woodrats across the whole state, because every once in a while I do get reports with photos of woodrats. People love sending. Please, if you catch a rodent, please email me or tweet it to me. I'm happy to identify it. And every once in a while, it is a woodrat. And in this most recent case, it was, I can't remember the county, but it was not on that map that I showed of the state of North Carolina. So post social isolation and pandemic, I'm hoping to get out and do a little more on the ground research to map and look at the distributions of these cool rodents here in our home state.
All right. Last question.
All right.
Cindy Lincoln's got this one.
Oh, good question, I'm sure.
So yeah, this is going to be a good one, right? Cindy says, pizza groundhog is trending right now on Twitter. Pizza groundhog. Would a groundhog really eat pizza?
I'm going to have to look up this pizza groundhog, but if you think about it, I don't see why not. Pizza, a good chunk of pizza is crust, right? And that's just simple carbohydrates that are something like a groundhog would be interested in eating. They're, mostly eating grass and seeds. And if you think about it, flour and the crust of pizza is really just processed grass and seeds that we've made for ourselves to eat. And I don't know if they're eating the cheese, maybe the sauce.
All right, there you go, Cindy. Pizza groundhogs.
I'll have to Google that one.
We I think you did a pretty good science on that one.
Yeah.
On working that one out. All right, Mike, thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you logging on for the virtual science cafe tonight.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I really enjoyed it. And those were great questions. I hope I answered them all properly.
I think you did a great job.
Thank you.
And no one in the chat box is saying that you did a terrible job. So
all right, we're
going to go with it 100%. That was amazing. But no, this is great. You had great images. The stories of these animals are incredible. The diversity, the cool stuff that they get up to, that was really fun.
Yeah.
So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
All right, everybody who's still tuned in, I want you to know that we will be back here at the museum's YouTube channel next Thursday night at 7 o'clock Eastern Time, once again for another virtual science cafe. That's April 23rd. We'll be talking to NC State planetary scientist Paul Byrne, and he's going to be talking to us about research on Venus and how that applies to what we know today about Earth. Ooh. So, ancient and future Earth and Venus with a planetary scientist. That's next Thursday night here at the Science Cafe. But between now and then, there's going to be a lot of stuff happening with the museum, because next week is also Earth Day. Next Wednesday, the 22nd, is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. So you know that the Museum of Natural Sciences, which has the world's largest globe that's part of a building in the world right there, the SECU Daily Planet, right? We're going to do Earth Day right. So every day, Monday through Friday next week, Monday through Friday at noon, you can come to the museum's YouTube channel, and we're going to be chatting with a special guest scientist about climate change, biodiversity, conservation. That's every day at noon. If you can't make all of those, though, on Earth Day itself, starting at 6:30 that night, we are doing an Earth Day party. We'll call it's a party for the planet. We've got a handful, I have a bunch of speakers lined up, scientists, conservationists, educators, who are going to drop into the YouTube live and share a few minutes about their research, their work, why it's important, why they care so much. So you don't want to miss that. Starting at 6:30, we're going to be going for at least a couple of hours with special guests dropping in and sharing what they're up to as it pertains to all things Earth. So you don't want to miss our Earth Day Streamathon. That'll kick off Wednesday, Earth Day at 6:30, noon Monday through Friday, and the Virtual Science Cafe next Thursday night. If you like science, if you like nature, then there's no better place to be than the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences YouTube channel. So to keep up with everything that's going on, you can follow the museum on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You can, of course, like and subscribe here on YouTube to get notifications when we're going live and bringing you new great stuff. And check out naturalsciences.org. There's a new Science at Home part of the website that you can get to from the homepage that has all kinds of do-it-yourself science activities. Our archive of video, there are hundreds of presentations of scientists that you can go back and watch and learn something new any minute of the day. And lots of great resources that we've pulled together as a museum to make available to all of you. So check all of that out. Hit Mike up on Twitter. Send him an email if you've got questions. Find us at the museum on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, have a great evening, everybody, and we'll see you again next time. Good night, everybody.